In this video, I'm going to show you how easily one can reuse existing identity server for the two totally isolated Sitecore instances. And for the sake of this experiment, I have installed vanilla Sitecore 9.3. I have installed it under this name, which is obviously new. And if you take a look at my IIS settings, I have two sets of Sitecore websites. UOL is my existing Sitecore environment. It has identity server, Xconnect, it is also 9.3 version, and a new one that I have just installed has also Sitecore, identity server, and Xconnect. So for the sanity of experiment, I will disable identity server. So I will stop the website, I will go and stop its identity server application pool. So it's totally off, it will be inoperable. And then I'm going to reuse existing URL identity server to be used and referenced from both new and old URL Sitecore instances. In my case, I'm using XP0 topology, where all the things are installed together, but in a scaled environment, these and these obviously are your CM instances where your Sitecore runs. So, what I'm going to do, first of all, I'm going to go to new Sitecore and tell this Sitecore to use this identity server instead of existing one. So there is a Sitecore variable called identity server authority that points to identity server to be used. And I'm changing it to use existing UOL identity server. And I save it. So now new Sitecore knows which identity server to knock for delegating authentication. But will that identity server let new Sitecore do the job? The obvious answer is no, until we explicitly tell this identity server which Sitecore instances it can use and which host names are permitted. There is a configuration file called identity server host under config production folder for that existing identity server. I open it up and there is a setting called allowed course origin group. Because UOL and UOL.identity server are different host names, that is a required setting for identity server to know which host names should it be allowed to process. So what I will do is I'll create another record and set up new Sitecore to be allowed for processing. So basically what I've done here is I whitelisted these host names for that identity server, but there is still something else that prevents exchanging data information, and that is a secret. So a secret is a shared piece of information that both CM, Sitecore, and identity server, they both know that and use that same piece of information to exchange so that they trust each other. So what I'll need to do is I'll need to grab this secret and set it up into a new Sitecore on CM instance. This is a connection string configuration, very well known for all the developers. This is where your core master web databases are referenced from. And there is also a setting for Sitecore identity secret. And I'm going to update this one with the value from identity server. Save it. And that's it. So I go and recycle application pool for that shared identity server. And what I suggest, let's give it a try. During this experiment, please pay attention to URL bar of my browser. So currently I am knocking into new instance, and that is CM for Sitecore interface. Now it's still new, but it's still new instance, but it is trying to find the setting which is responsible for identity server, and it will delegate authentication to that identity server which is referenced from this configuration. So basically it will go here. And as we see, the URL has changed. It's now UOL identity server. I quickly authenticate, login, and now it needs to call back to that CM that it's been calling from. new Sitecore and pass the result that authentication has been successfully. So you see I'm being redirected to new Sitecore and I am successfully authenticated. And one thing to keep in mind is that since if we are using Active Directory, that will work exactly as we expect it to work. But in this example, I am using a built-in user, which comes from the core database or security database, depending of the values from these two connection strings. In my example, they both point to the core database, and that means that it takes user from the core database of that identity server that we are using. And since I'm using identity server for existing instance, this one, it has a reference to a core database from that environment. So it will take core database from your L environment rather than U1. Of course, you can change these things, but since you are using identity server, both environments will be using that same settings. So it all looks positive, and I have just proven that it successfully can work together. Two separate instances can work sharing that same identity server. And thank you for watching.